All right, welcome to our last and maybe best talk of the day. I am so excited for this event. I say that at every event, but that's because I am, and I know you all are too. So if you're here and you're like, I don't actually know what I'm coming to, you're kind of in the mix, because I have left these wonderful ladies, which I will introduce in a second, in the dark. So you're going to be getting their organic answers to all things design. This is a design panel answering all of your questions of, how can I understand the field more? How can I understand people with personal experience? The great thing is really that all of these ladies have kind of come from diverse backgrounds. So Zainab here is a UX researcher at TWG, a Deloitte business. And I'm not going to go into their experiences because they'll fill you in a second. But we have Zainab as a UX researcher, and then we have Trisha as a UX designer, and she's from Havas CX. And then finally, we have Grace, and she's a product designer at Facebook, which I don't even know now if I'm supposed to be referring to it as Meta or what. I'm sure that's something that's totally like a hot topic of discussion whenever you're talking to people. But
definitely,
I guess
you probably do either. Either works. It's officially Meta though.
Okay. Well, we'll be. It will just really come out however it comes out tonight. But thank you, honestly, for all of you guys coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. And yeah, to all the audience members, if you have any additional questions, we would be happy for you to put them into the chat, and I will get to them, probably towards the end. But if you don't ask, then you'll never know. So that's the philosophy, and carpe diem, seize the day, ask some more questions. So with that, I will stop my lovely discussion here and kind of turn it over to the panelists to just start off maybe with an introduction of how you kind of got into your current role in terms of just getting into the design world. And we can start off with Grace, maybe.
Okay, yeah, I'll go first. So hi everyone to the audience. My name is Grace, and I'm currently a product designer at Meta, or Facebook, officially Meta, like I mentioned. Personally, okay, so I guess a little bit about me first. I recently graduated from the University of Waterloo from a program called Global Business and Digital Arts. Bit of a mouthful. And I've done a few internships here and there around design. And really how I got started with design and how I discovered design was, first I was in this design program in high school called Cyber Arts. And that was kind of my first introduction into graphic design and also a little bit of UI design. So I kind of knew from then that I wanted to kind of stay on a creative career path. And that's kind of when I looked at Global Business and Digital Arts as kind of like a general program that I can discover exactly what I want to do. And then the first year I had a UX course, and I realized it combined a lot of the things I was passionate about, things like psychology and graphic design, human behavior, and problem solving. So it just sounded like something that was fitting for the things that I like to do and wanted to kind of explore. I was also thinking about doing cognitive psychology as a degree in university, so it was just the shoe fit. So I never turned back after discovering it and just completely focused on doing UX, and that's how I'm here now.
Wow.
I'll pass it off to someone then. Yeah, Trisha, why don't you go next?
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Grace. So yes, my name is Trisha. I come from a global digital agency based in Toronto called Havas CX. So as an agency, we work with a variety of clients in the telecommunication space, banking, financial, e-commerce, you name it, we will design it. So it is in the digital space, so mostly apps and websites. So how I got into this space was I came from the University of Toronto with a double major in biology and psychology. A lot of my work was related to research, especially in the mental health space. I used to work at CAMH, so the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And through my research work, I felt that a lot of my work wasn't very tangible. So even in the research space, it was a lot of analysis, a lot of looking at data, but a lot of the work I was doing would be for long-term research papers versus actual maybe products that could help people in real time. I also craved for something a little bit more creative, and that's when I kind of stumbled on UX design, something that integrates psychology but also combines technology and real-time products that you can actually see people use, and can benefit corporations and the users that integrate with them. So I went into the graduate certification program at Guelph Humber for UX design, fell in love with it, and I had to get an internship. So I did a lot of networking events, and I happened to do a portfolio review, where one of my reviewers really liked my portfolio, referred me to some of the upper executives at Havas CX. I got an internship, and the rest is kind of history. I've been there for about 2 years now, and I am in love with this career. So I really excited to answer some of your questions since I was in your your seats just not too long ago. So that's it. I guess Zainab.
Thanks, Trisha. I come from a very similar background as Trisha, actually. So I went to U of T as well and did my undergrad in psychology also. And I originally, I had minored in sociology, and I was going more so in the direction of mental health, but in the Canadian justice system. But that requires a lot of studying, getting a master's and then a PhD, which requires a lot of money. So I figured that I needed to, once I graduated, like I needed to do something that I could make money off of. And at the time, I was also taking a bunch of elective design courses at Sheridan College. And my professor had told me about the industry of design thinking, which got me interested because at the time I was very stressed out. A lot of people were saying, you know, the only thing that you can do with psychology is within the actual like mental health field directly. And there's not much you can do with an undergraduate because you're not certified as a therapist. So I looked into design thinking, and I got an internship as just a design thinking intern. I did a bunch of stuff, which eventually turned into a full-time experience designer position. So I tried out a little bit of UX, UI design, dabbling here and there into service design a little bit. But I found that a lot of my undergrad was research. And so going into UX research was something that I felt I was a little bit more suited for. And eventually I landed a position at TWG at Deloitte Business, and I've been there ever since. And I'm loving UX research. I just really like the idea that I can research something. As Trisha also mentioned, you know, when you go into research, especially in the mental health field, it's long-term research. But with, you know, working on like 2-week sprints, for example, you see your research coming to life a lot quicker. So that was a really rewarding experience.
Wow. I love literally all of the enthusiasm and just your answers. Just as like an undergraduate student myself and studying psychology and kind of transitioning, it's kind of so cool to see the different paths that people take for sure. And kind of going into that a little bit more, I'm just wondering about, you know, because I feel like we all have them to an extent of just like a really influential specific experience in your path, or even just a figure who's really helped in becoming the researcher or designer that you are today. And maybe we should reverse the order.
Oh, so I go first this time?
You go first. You're on the hot seat.
Okay. Yeah. So when I was a little intern, still in my undergrad, I was working in a corporate office, and it can be very intimidating in downtown Toronto. And so I had a buddy at work that was partnered up with me, and she was basically showing me the ropes of everything. And I was talking to her. I can't remember exactly what we were talking about, but I was trying to explain some design concept. And at the end of it, I said, I don't know, does that make sense? And she said to me, don't ever ask, does that make sense? Because let the other person ask you. It's your idea. And if someone else doesn't understand it, let them ask you. You be confident in your own ideas. And that was the most powerful thing that anyone's ever said to me. I was like, whoa, oh my God. Like, especially as someone who's really in like the industry, like from the beginning, from the get-go, and feeling a little bit insecure about being in meetings with people who've, you know, been in the industry longer than you've been born. And so she also told me that, you know, don't, even if you ever feel insecure about anything, just remember that you're in this meeting because at least one person in the room believes that you need to be there. And that's all you need. You only need one advocate. So I would say she was a big push, especially as a woman in the industry.
That's amazing. I'm going to remember that. That is like good advice. Okay. And over to Trisha.
I feel like we're all gonna have the same answers because for me as well, it was actually when I first started, we had a team member. Her name was actually Sneha, but she was extremely influential in how like I approach the design process. I think she really helped me look at problems holistically in terms, instead of always nitpicking at things. Something else that I felt that maybe people don't always understand when they get into industry versus in school is, in school a lot of the times you can go extremely creative with your solutions, but in industry there's always quite a few of like constraints and regulations based on the companies that you're working with. And she was really good at helping me break down the difference between going too far with your ideas and when to like tone it down. And I feel like finding that balance is something that you get with experience. But I think when you first go into the industry, it can be a little bit jarring when you come from a space in institutions where you can like go as far as you'd like to go with this. Whereas once you get into industry, it's very much about actually you have to tone it down quite a bit. You can only do certain aspects of this. There's constraints when it comes to developers, visual design with maybe existing components or design systems. So taking all of that into consideration kind of makes you that really great user experience designer. And it doesn't always have to be over the top. Simplicity can always be the best solution. So she was really influential in getting me to tone it down a bit when it came to presenting these full-fledged ideas that in theory may be great, but in reality may not work so well.
Yeah, that's like a harsh like lesson to learn, but also like important when it's like we have all these ideas and we're like, oh my gosh, this would be so great, but it's sometimes just not realistic for sure.
Exactly.
Okay. I guess I'll start with my answer. My answer is just a little bit different. I would say one of the most influential people in the design space that I've encountered is actually the professor who taught me UX design in first year. I think she's a very popular professor in my program for sure. Her name's Karen. And you know, she was the first person to kind of introduce the concept of design thinking and UX design to me. And she also has this immense passion for design itself as well, and you can really see it through her lessons. And she was also just a really cool teacher. And I think when you're first learning something or being introduced to a topic, the teacher is so important, because if you have a bad teacher, you also lose passion for that particular topic. And I think because I had such a good introduction and start to this industry, I really stuck with it, and I'll always be grateful for her as a professor.
Oh, absolutely. I always find it's like I look back at all the classes that I've had and I'm like, honestly, it didn't matter about the topic. It was how passionate that person was, which is amazing. And also it's kind of important in trying to figure out, you know, what are you going to learn next? And on that note, what's something that you're currently like working on learning within the design field? That was like a great transition. Just gonna
I can go first for this one. Actually, what I'm currently learning is accessibility standards and actually working towards getting my accessibility specialist certification. Coming into the agency space, like I said, we work on a variety of projects. So from banking, for example, with TD, RBC, e-commerce, each of these industries or each of these companies have different accessibility standards when it comes to how they design their websites. But inclusive design is becoming more and more of a criteria that is needed in any digital platform. So whether it's a website or an app. So while we do have really great experts in accessibility at our company, it tends to be more on the development side versus something that is iterated or integrated within the actual design process. So something that we're working towards is making sure that a lot of the visual designers, the researchers, the UX designers, the strategists all have some knowledge on accessibility standards, especially the WCAG ones, so that they can start thinking about it early on versus accessibility coming up more at the end of the process when things have already been designed and in development. So that's something that I'm working towards and something I'm passionate about, making sure that as a UX designer, that everyone has the ability to use the products that you're designing for. So yeah.
Amazing.
That's great. I'll follow up on Trisha's. Yeah. So I think, accessibility is also great, and I love your answer. Mine is a little bit different. I think for me, it's more soft skill focus and what I'm currently kind of working towards. I think especially as kind of a recent graduate and someone who's like very new to industry work, one thing that I really have been learning and that my partner designer has been helping me through is just, I guess like being determined in your decisions and like, I guess knowing that you are the designer and you're the one who is making decisions. Because, I think when you are an intern, you're kind of have your hand held through your internship, and you always have someone to kind of look at your work and review it and give you feedback. But I think once you move on to a more full-time role, that kind of responsibility is placed on your shoulders. And especially, when you're working with so many cross-functional partners and engineers and PMs who all have a say in the design and want to give you their opinions, it's hard to really filter through them and still say, I'm the designer. The decision is, at the end of the day, it's yours to make. And it's just something that I also have to kind of remind myself because, starting off in your career, you're still like unsure if like what you're doing is, the right way to do it. But then like, it's just building that confidence and determinism of, the decisions that I'm making. I think that's one thing I'm definitely working through.
Yeah. Soft skills, honestly, like it's like a whole process. I feel like going through it. I'm actually really interested in service design. I find it so much more different than just general design, because I feel like designs typically, I kind of started off in like the enterprise design kind of sphere. So it's really different because, your stakeholder is nine times out of 10 the client. But when it comes to service design, it's not necessarily the client that's the stakeholder, it's the end users and there's just so many moving parts that are part of this whole equation that I find so interesting. So designing something that people are like going to be interacting with like in a live process, I find really interesting. I actually started reading this book. It's over on my bookshelf. I think it's called Service Design for Business. And it's really interesting because it goes over the whole like history of how service design kind of came to be a little industry of its own, and how basically people originally, it was a very much mindset that people will come to you, like they'll bring you their business. And it was a mindset that businesses had that, oh, well, you clearly want our business and can't find it anywhere else, therefore you need us. But the whole industry of customer service, where the customer is always right approach, that translated into how customers and clients wanted to interact with businesses, where it was, we don't need you, we could take our business elsewhere. So kind of having that whole service design approach was really interesting, and learning the history. And I'm still going through the book, But I also find that one of the privileges of being in the field of design also is that you're constantly learning because the field's also very quickly evolving. And I mean, I worked on projects that, like I worked on a mortgage project one time, and I don't know anything about mortgage, but I learned in that project. So it's really, I feel like it's very cross-functional in the sense that every project that you're on, you take something home to learn from that as well.
Wow. That was amazing. And it's good to see, like, you know, it's kind of a lesson, and, you know, we're always still learning. And I think it's also always interesting to see what people are reading. Because I had a question here that was, what's your favorite design related book? But if you are reading, I'll pose this to all of you again. But if you're reading one currently that's kind of made you think about anything design related, then feel free to say that as well.
Service design for business.
I'll give a black sheep answer. I like, full transparency, I suck at reading. I cannot finish a book. I'm not even gonna lie. I'm really bad at reading things. I learned, like, I guess to kind of continue on learning, I learned a lot of design through just like online resources, articles which are 5 minutes long to read, you know, videos and podcasts, things like that. So yeah, unfortunately, books are just not my preferred medium.
That's fair. That's fair. Do you have any like YouTube or like any kind of like specific design individuals that you'd recommend to people?
Yes. I follow a lot of people on Medium, for example.
Okay.
One of the bigger names is Julie Zhuo.
She has a book.
She has a really amazing book called The Making of a Manager, which I did try to read. I read like a few chapters before my loan expired. I didn't buy the book, I borrowed it from the library, and then I had to return it, and I was just, you know, it's fine. It was a really good read for the few chapters that I did read. And then there are some other designers in the industry that I follow, like Tiffany Eaton, Gunbei Lee. There's some other ones, yeah, but some to name. Those are the people.
Yeah.
There's this Netflix show that I would really recommend. It's called Abstract. Okay. And each episode is, Trisha's nodding, like, have you watched it?
Yes, I have. Yes. It's great.
It's really good. Each episode talks about a different designer, and they're all different kinds of design. And there were some that used like biometrics or something. It was very interesting. 10 out of 10 recommend.
Okay, I wrote that down. Thank you. And Trisha, how about you?
For me, I do read sometimes. I'm currently reading a book on like UX research, and on the side, because we do a lot of usability testing, but it might not be as in depth as maybe what you do day to day, Zainab. So I'm trying to up my skills there. In terms of podcasts, I tend to listen to like Usable is a really good one. And I watch a lot of just YouTube videos. It's kind of something also like when you first start, is once you start figuring out things that you don't know, you just start researching on the side and figuring out things as you go. I remember I had to do a couple of usability tests for a client, and they expected really high fidelity Figma prototypes. And while I was somewhat proficient with Figma, I didn't know how to prototype as well in terms of the animations that they required for usability testing. And a lot of it was just weekend YouTubing and like figuring it out. And I think we're so lucky to be in an industry where there's like so many resources for you to go through with being new to it. Like you don't always have to go the school route to be proficient in UX design. I don't know if everyone would agree with that, but I've learned so much just from YouTube itself. And I think a lot of people can join industry just through courses in combination with YouTube and reading materials. So I think we're in a really cool space where it allows you to totally jump ship from another career if you want to, without having to spend thousands of dollars for an education in it. Mm-hmm. So sorry, that was a little bit of a segue from what your original question was, but yeah.
Oh, that's okay. I'm here for it. It's something that I find cool as well, for sure. And I think it's also cool because it's also I feel like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but just like on the day-to-day kind of, because design is so cross-functional, working with these other roles within whatever company you're at. That you can be like educating just as they are to you, like, this is what my role is, and this is kind of what I do. So actually, based off of that, if there was kind of like a crash course for any of the roles that you work with, so like especially like devs or like any engineering role, what would you tell them in that presentation about your role, or how best to work with you? Yeah.
I like to describe myself as a glorified Google.
Okay.
Basically, like, if you need an answer, I'm just gonna go figure it out. I think one of the best ways to work, the thing with the researching role is typically there's not a lot of researchers on any project. There could be maybe one, maybe two, but typically there's one. So a lot of the stuff that we do is very industry standard. It's just people have a different way of, in terms of style of how they like to synthesize their information. So I think one really good thing is to have good communication in terms of check-ins, and communicate, especially with PMs, in terms of timelines, because running an interview is one thing, but then you should expect 1 to 2 hours of synthesis per interview. So kind of working that into project timelines. Like if you have to run 10 interviews and you only have, 5 days, how are you going to work those into the timeline? So I think having good communication on that is super, super important.
Awesome. Does anyone? Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go.
I think from the UX design perspective, I would say we're almost like the first line of defense in a way. We are the people who kind of, for the team, express what we don't know. So even though we're the experts, we're kind of the experts in asking questions. So in a lot of the projects, it's actually the UX designer who has to piece together what the requirements are, what are the criteria, what are the barriers, and then start formulating, okay, what do we not know? What do we have to go back to client and get clarification on? What do we need to start moving forward with some type of design proposal? Once we start creating those wireframes, creating those annotations, then only do we start moving on to testing those ideas, going to visual design, clarifying with developers what's feasible or not feasible. But we are that first line of communication almost between the PM, the client, because the PMs are the communicators between our team and the clients, but they don't know what to ask them, and we have to figure that out. So I would say we're almost like the detectives in a way. First line of defense, detectives, that similar realm of trying to ask the questions that haven't been asked yet to make sure that we get a product that works for the users as well as the clients, and working within those constraints. Yeah.
I think for me, I agree with Zainab and Trisha's descriptions. I think the workflow within an in-house product team is a little bit different from perhaps client-facing projects. But I think like the first line defense is a good way to describe it. I think I would say it's more of like a very close partnership. At least for me, how it usually works, I think communication really is just key, and how you manage communication with the engineers. We product designers were there at the very start of the process. As soon as we get an ask from leadership to build something, then we're the ones who have to find, okay, how are we going to build this feature? What kind of research do we need? Involving ourselves in conversations with the PM and the engineers to make sure that everything is feasible, and scoping timelines and things like that. We're practically like partners within the whole process. And afterwards, when we're actually designing and delivering things, having check-ins very often to check on progress, as well as making sure that Eng has everything that they need to continue their work stream. So I think it's a very equal partnership, and we're always involved with each other at every step of the process.
Wow. This is so I don't know, it's just so informative in terms of, how different people view their role. And I think it's also interesting because different organizations handle this slightly differently, and kind of the way that your organization views your role shapes what you do to an extent. So kind of building off of what Grace was talking about there, of how they approach the process. I'm wondering how each of your companies, and you can also compare this to past companies as well, but how is a culture created surrounding around design at the place that you work right now?
I would say it's a lot of teamwork, especially so from a research perspective. As Grace mentioned, for designers, usually there's an end-to-end process that they go through from beginning of the project to the end of the project. For research, you're typically just there for the beginning part of it, and once you've done the research and you've handed it over, it's kind of up to the design and development team to then have it come into fruition. But I think in those initial stages, a lot of communicating between the researcher and the designer, especially if it's for I'll give you an example. I worked on a project where the deliverable was a website, and just working very closely with the designer in terms of, okay, well, this is what the user test has said. How can we implement that into the wireframes? And then because it was a 2-week sprint and we didn't have too much time, we were basically every single time we were getting redundant information for one screen for the next day's interviews, we were just implementing that feedback into the screen until the usability test was scoring really well. And so that was one way that we worked together and communicated and constantly made sure that we were also communicating with the client. So I feel like in my experience, the best projects have worked seamlessly when there's good communication on all parts of the team.
To speak a little bit about culture, I think at least the culture at Meta or Facebook, in terms of how they look at design, is really good, because they do put a lot of emphasis on the importance of design. And I think that is because, with an in-house product team, the product is like your flagship. It's something that you keep working on, through time. You're just constantly improving the products that you're building. And they know that product designers are kind of the people who are responsible for improving and making sure that the experience of these products are great. So I think I really appreciate that strong design culture, and I think every cross-functional partner also understands that. So when you're working with PMs or devs and other sort of partners, they also see the value of design, and they know that it comes first, and they won't cut corners for other things to kind of whether that is meeting deadlines or something. Those corners aren't cut. And I think in some of my previous experiences, that wasn't always the case. So it was kind of great to kind of see that culture. And I think everyone and the designers within the team are also very passionate about their work. So it's kind of great to be in that environment, and it motivates you as well.
I guess I'm next. But for agency, it really varies in terms of, we also work very closely with quite a few different teams. So we have a specific visual design team, we have an analytics team, we have a development team, and then obviously I'm part of the UX team. So here, different industries or different companies sometimes define the UX role in terms of pure UX, where maybe what you learn in school, so wireframing, information architecture, things like that. But in some companies, it's almost combined with UI and UX. So here we have a pretty clear distinction between the two. We have a visual design team and the UX team. For each of our projects, though, it also varies in terms of what our role is. So there were some projects where I was the main UX researcher and constantly running usability tests every 2 weeks for sprints. In other projects, I was almost the main UX designer and constantly wireframing, coming up with iterations, giving it to someone else for usability testing, and then redesigning based on those results. And then there are projects where you're actually more of a strategist, or for information architecture. Currently, I'm working on a project where we're trying to come up with design principles that kind of formulate the entire design process for this company. So they want these design principles to outline how their internal teams go about creating new features and products going forward. Now, in turn, coming up with those design principles, it'll be a lot of stakeholder workshops, interviews to figure out how the actual clients or stakeholders define what they find valuable within their community or within their company, to then formulate those design principles that they can integrate. But that one, for example, is very much strategic thinking and research versus what you may think a UX designer may not do so much of. So there's a lot of variety, which I actually quite enjoy. And you kind of wear a different hat for every single project that you work on. And if you ever work in agency, you'll probably find something similar, or similar experience.
Amazing. Thank you guys. You guys are just gracing me with so many great answers. And I'm seeing questions in the chat. So we'll be getting to those very soon. So put some more in if you want to, but I'm gonna switch it up a little bit because it's always nice to focus on the successes and what you're learning day to day, but I think sometimes we block out those moments of projects gone wrong, or things that are those moments of oh man, this was not that much of a success. But those are also great learning opportunities. So if you're comfortable with it, I'm sure everyone would really appreciate if you can tell us a little bit about some time that, something went wrong or something was really not as expected and you kind of got a takeaway from that.
I remember there was this project that I worked on once. This was the first time that I was dealing with a client that had any pushback, because I would say fortunate enough to have great client experiences, but I feel like everyone at some point in their career will have that one client that you're it feels like it broke me. And that was my experience. It was so I was this was the first time that I was a sole UX researcher on a project. And I remember I did a bunch of research for them, and I was presenting personas, and there was just so much pushback. It was very much, the thing is, the client came from a background where they weren't used to design processes. They were used to the whole, we told you what we want, now you come back to us with it built. And you know how there's a whole design process where you co-create, you collaborate, you say, what is it that you'd like us to solve, getting you to the root of the problem. And they didn't see the point in that. I remember I was leading, this was the first workshop that I was leading as well. And they stopped me and they were like, I don't see the point in this. And I don't understand why we have to continue doing this. Why can't it be done over a 10-minute phone call? And they were just going off at me. And I was just sitting there listening, oh, and holding back the tears, can't cry on camera. And it was a lot to hear. And I remember talking to my manager after, because I was like, what do I do? Because they've straight up just said that I don't see the value in the work that you're doing. And that can really shake someone up. And luckily my manager was really sweet, and he was telling me about how the thing is, all you can do at this point is just present them with facts. And facts are your best friend, because when you're in a situation where you're presenting research findings and someone straight up just says, I don't believe you, even though these are the numbers, all you can do is say in that situation, then, okay, can you please provide me with your research? I would love to look into the direction where you're coming from. And just kind of understanding and working about how do you kind of get around those kinds of situations and then learn from it, so that when you're ever in a situation again, you have the facts backing you from the get-go and you're presenting those from the start. So yeah.
I have a similar experience. I feel like I've been quite fortunate in terms of I haven't had anything quite too negative happen to me yet. I think the difference is a lot of, because we are a digital agency, the clients know what they're getting when they hire us for UX design or UX research work. I think what happens is sometimes clients can get a little bit overboard about what's within scope and what's not. So usually the PM team and executives have already met with the clients way before they come to the UX design side to start working on the project. And when it comes to those design reviews, if it doesn't always meet expectations or suddenly they come up with new ideas, it's constantly having those conversations of like, that's great, but that's not really within the scope, or that's technically not what you paid for. So it's something that would then have to go higher up if they want to then incorporate it later on. A lot of the projects I've worked on, timelines always get pushed. Timelines never always are met, and it's not always the UX designer's fault. It's just that things start changing both on the client side as well as on the UX design side. Sometimes we start testing things and we realize it's not working, and we realize that it may take a little bit more time than expected to design something that's more complicated than we expected. Or sometimes the client doesn't always give you the full picture and you don't realize it until much later in the process. So I think it's really important to know that there's no standardized process for UX design. It can constantly change based on the scope and based on the criteria that you're given. And you just have to kind of adjust and work with that. And so it's something important to be mindful of when coming into this industry, is just being able to adapt with whatever is thrown at you and roll with the punches. So if you have that skill set, you'll do really well here.
Okay, I think the story that I want to kind of bring up, my personal, the project that I want to talk about is more about a personal feeling. And it happened a bit recently when I first joined. I was assigned my first few projects, and one of the projects that I had to work on, and I was working on several projects at the same time, due in, I think, a couple weeks' time. So I just joined, I was new to everything, and I didn't even know what the product really looked like at this point when I first was assigned this project. But the project that I'm talking about had a lot of technical aspects to it. There was a lot of logic that was involved, data collection and things like that, which I didn't perfectly understand. But I had conversations with the main engineer who was working on this project with me. And I asked a lot of questions related to the document that I received that talked about all of these requirements that I had to keep in mind when I was designing this product. So after that conversation, I thought I had enough to kind of start the project. So I, created the flow, built the screens, and then I had another sync with the engineer to kind of go over what I've created. But lo and behold, it turned out that I was misunderstanding a lot of things. He mentioned things about user behavior, things that I didn't have a lot of insight on when I first started the project, and how that would affect my designs. And obviously, those are very important things to know when you're designing something, and understanding what the existing user behavior is for a certain feature, and also, included with the tech requirements. And I also the tech requirements were also a little hard to understand too. So from that, I learned, ask as many questions as you need, as much as possible, so that you don't have to go back to the drawing board and make edits when you could have done that correctly in the first place. And I think this is probably something that a lot of people will experience early on in their career. And I'm happy that it happened like early, so I had that time and the excuse of being new to fix that. But it was definitely a lesson to learn the hard way.
I also wanted to, sorry.
No, you.
I just wanted to add a point that kind of reminded me when Trisha mentioned, like how the scope sometimes changing and the clients always like ask sometimes for more. One thing that also kind of helped in the same client project that I mentioned that we actually started doing after that call was we already had like a layout of the deliverables because usually in a sprint or however you're working, you have a timeline of when to expect what. And at the beginning of every single meeting, kind of reiterating, okay, so in terms of like the whole layout, this is where we're at now, this is what the deliverables are for this day, like reiterating that at every single meeting is also super helpful, because then that keeps the client on track with what's happened so far and what they can look forward to, as opposed to, when you start doing testing and then they're like, oh, wait, let me just add more. So it's just it functions as a good little reminder at the beginning of every meeting.
Awesome. Sorry to make you feel like I'm not cutting you off at all. Honestly, this panel is like the best things come from building off of each other. So if you have something to say, just jump in for sure. And I realize we're kind of getting towards the end of our time. So I'm going to switch over to the questions in the chat. And that starts with a question that Trey has asked about barriers and what the biggest barrier that you've had or experienced while working in this industry.
I can start with this one. I think for me, I came in from a very academic research heavy background. And then when I went into the graduate program, it was really good. It was only a 1-year program. So it was more about teaching us the design process, all the kinds of deliverables that clients may ask for, things like that. But I wasn't fully prepared, I think, for going into the industry. So while I really excelled on the usability testing or research side of things, when it came to the actual design part, it was getting those technical skills. So learning all how to, like, I was an artist before, but it's very different translating from like drawing and painting to creating wireframes on like Adobe XD, Figma, Sketch, learning what pixel perfect is, all the different terminology, how to ask questions. I know that's come up quite a bit, but like how to ask questions, what are the right types of questions? There are no right types of questions. All questions are fine. It was really learning just how to be technical in this. Also, because you are the communicator between so many different teams, you also have to know a little bit about each one. So with the visual design team, what do they want to look for in the wireframes? From the development team, what do they need you in terms of annotations, how to write the right types of annotations? How do you too specific or is it too vague? All those little technicalities add up. And because you wear so many hats in this role, it's like you kind of have to be an expert in each one. And that can become very overwhelming. However, my boss and my team have been amazing. And it's very much kind of reassuring where it's like it comes with experience. I still struggle with all those things today. Obviously, I'm still early in my career. But I think overall, it's just making sure you know those technical skills, because once those are solid, communicating your ideas gets easier once you know how to actually produce them in the first place.
Oh, go ahead, Grace.
Okay, yeah, I'll go next. For me, I think the greatest challenges going into the industry are communication, working with your cross-functional partners, and also, well, that's the first point. And then the second point is working with constraints. So I think one thing that I really had to adjust to when I first started working as a full-time was all of the communication and talking that I had to do. And I think as an introvert, it's always been challenging to kind of be in a lot of conversations, being in so many meetings, and talking to people in general, when your work, especially as a UX designer, because as Trisha said, you're working with so many different teams, you do have to understand what their work stream is like, how you integrate into it, and how you can collaborate with them, because the UX design process just has so many touch points with different cross-functional partners. And that is definitely something that I'm still working through right now. And even asking the right questions and is still something I'm learning. What you don't really know what you don't know. So it's hard to determine what questions you're supposed to ask, what knowledge you still need to acquire for proceeding with your work. So I think that's still a barrier that I'm working through. And secondly, something that was more surprising to me was working with real life constraints, because when you're just starting, like if you're in this designathon and you're working on your project, it's so blue skies. You can go in any direction that you want. And you don't necessarily have to think about what does the code base allow you to do, or the constraints that usually come with a real world project, or even things like working within a design system. You can't just keep introducing new components, because if there's an existing design system, you have to use it, and introducing something new is going to be a big cost to the project or the company. So things like that were new to me and challenging in the beginning, and still something that I work through now.
For me, I would say navigating and learning the space was kind of a barrier. And I mean that in terms of, and I think this can apply to both design and research as well, because any time that you're spending in meetings, you're not spending on your work. So it was a lot in the beginning to learn how to say no to meetings that if you're not needed in, to be able to block time out of your calendar so that you can spend that time working. Because also as a fresh graduate who wasn't used to a 9-to-5 schedule, 5 o'clock work's done, it's a weird kind of transition where it's like I went from studying all day long to now being like, okay, what do I do past 5 o'clock now? So that was something that was really interesting to kind of learn to navigate around. Also the idea of being, when you're either an intern still in undergrad or a fresh graduate in your job, kind of being the youngest person in the room. And it is kind of intimidating when you're, talking to like people who are senior managers, partners, or like clients who are of so much a higher seniority than you. But it was really beneficial to me, the fact that I was in teams that had this whole dynamic of empowerment, saying that, you're the researcher, so you own the work, and giving me the opportunity to present my findings. And if I was ever in a difficult situation, luckily I had people on my team that were great advocates, and they just reiterated exactly what I had said to make sure the point would get across. So just being around like a team where you're empowered to own your work is really good. And when it comes to being empowered to say no.
I think that's been a theme today of it's so easy to say yes, but it's harder to say no. And it honestly can bring up so much more, because it's a hard decision, but then you can say yes to something else. So that's, there's so much there that I resonated with. And also, I'm just going to ask a quick follow-up question, because Trisha, you talking about your experiences with your master's, I believe, is just, it always is curious for me in terms of like how necessary is that of getting something after undergrad in the design field or in, the UX research field.
So it wasn't a master's, it was a graduate certification. So they say on the website it's master's level, and a lot of these master programs that are 1 year actually do cover the same 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 criteria, but what happens is, because it's from a college, so Humber College, it's a graduate certificate versus a master's program, but for me, it was extremely beneficial because I was coming from a totally different field in terms of, from an academic like U of T type program where it was highly more research based, and then needing to figure out how to enter an industry with zero knowledge of it yet. It's also, I feel like it depends on the type of learner you are. I am someone who is not the greatest at self-study. I need structure. I need someone to tell me what to read and when to read it. I need projects, things like that for me to learn it. If you just put me on my own and be like, figure it out and learn it, I will be there for like 5 years trying to do it. I need time constraints. So for me, being in a program worked out really well. It was also really great because you meet so many other people entering the industry. It's very collaborative. You learn so much from others as well. In terms of the actual stuff that you do learn, like I was saying earlier in our conversation, you can find all those materials everywhere else. You can find how to learn, become proficient in Adobe XD, Figma, Sketch on YouTube. I will stand by that. You can learn a lot of the processes in books and in textbooks. You don't have to be in a classroom to become a UX designer. But it, again, I think depending on the type of learner you are, certain environments may be beneficial for you in terms of how you learn to become one. For me personally, while I know I can get all those materials outside of school, I needed that school structure for me to be proficient in the material that they were teaching.
And also, just adding on to Trisha's point as well, correct me if I'm wrong, if from your experience, because I also, I was thinking about that at one point as well. I was talking to my manager, you know, do I pursue higher education in the field of UX and get a master's in it just as like a certification, or do I take, because there's so many courses that are provided by companies that are kind of leading UX in the industry. So like IDEO, Google, like they offer these courses. And from what I was told was that usually these master's programs are more geared towards people who are coming from a different industry who are trying to switch into the UX industry. So if you come from like some sort of experience in UX, it's going to be a very much repetitive process in a master's program. Whereas if you're doing like a Google Coursera course or an IDEO course, because these are certifications by companies that are kind of leaders in the field of UX, those are kind of seen as pretty much the same level.
I agree. I think also when it comes to higher learning, I feel like if you're already in industry, if you want to pursue like another master's degree, because I feel like experience is actually really key in moving up or going to new companies, as long as you have projects that relate to what they need you to do and you can say that you're proficient in the tasks that you need to perform as a UX designer, then most of the time you're going to be okay. In terms of higher education, I would say programs that actually complement being a UX designer. So something I'm personally looking at is if I do want to do another, like do a master's program, it may be in inclusive design or in AI or in computer learning, things that I can combine with my UX design knowledge that would maybe take me to another level or into a niche industry if that's something that I'm passionate about. So just something to think about if you already have a background in UX. I wouldn't say doing another master's in UX would be that beneficial, but maybe something that complements it would be.
Yeah, that was super helpful, honestly, guys. So just from my own personal like desire. So thank you for that. I know that we're like almost at our 1 hour mark, but if it's okay with you guys, I know there's 3 questions left in the chat. So if you're okay with staying for a couple extra minutes, I'd love to get to those. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Perfect. Just wanted to make sure you guys are rushing off to something. But then we'll go to Erica's question, which is all about really inspiration. And so she's talking specifically about, you know, when you're creating, you know, the current design, how do you go about that? Well, I guess this is also falling under, you know, whatever design system is in place and all of that, and respecting those past decisions that have been made.
I can speak to this. In terms of drawing inspiration from existing designs, yes, I do it all the time. And I think sometimes it is in the form of a competitive analysis. If you're building a new flow, you might want to look at, what your competitors have done, what opportunities there are, like what they haven't done is an opportunity for you to improve on and capture that in your user flow to address the same problem. And then additionally, I think as designers, it's great to kind of keep up on, trends and what other designers are doing, because there's a lot of creativity out there. And for me personally, sometimes as designers, you do get stuck creatively and you need to look out for, inspiration. So I definitely look at resources to see what industry leaders are doing, what other like new concepts or designs people are doing in the field as well, as like inspiration and motivation if I'm ever in a rut.
And on the same vein, Picasso actually had a quote that was, good designers copy, or good designers create, great designers steal. So, you know what, like things exist for you to build off of, right? Like, I think one of the best things about the design community is that there's so many templates and everything that exists on open source, and kind of drawing elements from there, like in color theory or in, or like fine line work, like, yeah, that stuff already exists, but how do you kind of cater it to what it is that you're working with, and kind of drawing inspiration from different things, whether it could be, like a YouTube video or an interesting painting that you saw. Like, inspiration exists kind of all around you. And I think the great thing about design is that you can draw inspiration from really anything. Like, I remember one time I had to facilitate a workshop and I wanted it to be unique. I was like, I want people to come into this and feel like, wow, this is such an experience, right? And so I actually watched some people doing improv classes or doing some sort of like drama activities, and seeing how I can incorporate that into my workshop to make the workshop more interactive. And what is acting and what is design? They're both completely different fields, but there's somehow you can bring a way to integrate them. So
I just want to add on to your point. I think you have a really good point about like, drawing inspiration from, not just design uses online, but anything. And it reminds me of the Google material design system, because their entire design system is based off of surfaces or like paper. So if you look at how like a piece of paper might interact with a piece of paper below it and how it casts a shadow above, and it's about the layering of those surfaces. So you can even draw inspiration from everyday objects. And I remember seeing this other case study that someone did about designing an interaction of like a pull interaction based off of the touch and feel of a rubber band, of an elastic, and how it bounces. So those kind of projects really inspire me, and how they draw inspiration from just like everyday things around them.
I think one other thing to add is you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. I think a lot of people get stuck in this cyclical nature of like, oh, it has to be different. Oh, it has to be cool. It has to be on trend. But sometimes the most creative designs are the most simple ones, right? How did I make something so complicated so simple, right? You don't need to find 50 different ways of how to do a drop-down menu. But the way you integrate that drop-down menu into a flow to make it easy for the user is what makes it a creative design. So what you draw from inspiration could just be like, how did they simplify that? And how can I now integrate that into my own design? So you don't always have to invent something new, but just utilize it in a way that actually simplifies it or makes it more efficient or effective. I think that's the key here, and especially in this industry.
Yeah, like one of my favorite examples is Bluetooth devices, like a Bluetooth mouse, for example. Like, mouses always existed. You just took the wire out and you made the process like so much easier. But just don't do what Apple did and put the charger at the bottom. That is not good UX. My favorite example.
That's good. Actually, just jumping there's one other question, but I'll jump into this because it's kind of relates really well. But Do you have an example that you kind of go off of that is like your favorite design or your favorite website layout or app or something that you're like, wow, this is a good user experience that comes to mind?
I have an answer right away. My favorite app is TikTok. not just because I'm addicted to it, but also just because I think the interaction design for TikTok is just genius. It was like, I think when I first experienced the app, I think it might be different now, but when I first onboarded to the app, when I joined like a year or two ago, it's like they just show you the first video. They don't even wait for you to make an account because they know they want to capture your attention. And then, you know, they just say scroll up and then there you go, the next video. There's literally no interruption to the flow of content that you get. And I think recent changes that they made to their app as well have been great, which is like when they have an ad, you swipe up and like you get to the next video before it's like you swipe up, you actually like navigate to like the ad details, which I found really annoying because they're like constantly improving it too, which is great. But I think that simple interaction of just the swipe up was, you know, has managed to capture the attention of millions of people who use the app today. And also just like the format of the video, the experience of the app. I mean, I think you can talk about the pros and cons of, you know, social media and the evils of social media, but in purely design decision aspect, it's like so simple that it's great.
Yeah, and truly, like, why is TikTok so hot these days? It's because it has such a good UI. And I think in terms of just the experience with the user as well, like the fact that everyone has equal chances of going viral, I think that's also like the biggest asset that the app has as well. Like, you know, with YouTube, you have to have some sort of like background to it, or you need to know the right people, you know, be collabing with the right people. But with TikTok, everyone has an equal chance. So that's great. And I always make jokes about, you know, like what the day I go viral is the day I quit my job. That's going to be my side hustle. My work is actually my side hustle. But I think TikTok is definitely like they've captured so many different users' needs, especially with the fact that so many people have we're coming into an era with where the generations now have a shorter attention span. So definitely like capturing that. I feel like they definitely drew some elements from Vine. So I think that was really, really good. But also I love anytime Apple is about to have a new release, I love going onto their website. Their animations are just so amazing. I don't even care about the product. I'm just there to scroll through and watch like the screen evolve.
Yeah, I was gonna say Apple as well. I personally, I also love TikTok, but when it comes to like industry, I think what we tend to do is each component kind of has a preference. So sometimes some websites have better menus than others. Some have better navigation than others. So we tend to start nitpicking, or part of our competitive analysis usually is taking apart certain websites and just taking key features that we like from each one and kind of coming up with like a combination of it for our new design. So that kind of answers, I think, a question from further up, but sometimes you have to take inspiration from multiple of the same component to then come up with like a new version of it that works the best for you and your in the industry. But definitely agree, TikTok is amazing. Can spend a couple of hours on it. Don't tell my boss.
I wanted to kind of give two bonus shout outs to Uber and Tinder. So I think one thing that Tinder does really great is how they introduced the swipe thing, and it just kind of changed the whole idea of like mobile dating. Now everything has a swipe. You know, you go to Hackathon, it's like swipe for what dinner choices you're gonna make today. You know, so that was sort of like a revolutionary component within the design space. And then the interesting thing about Uber is the fact that it changed the way that like we think about strangers in society. Like the app concept in itself has made us trust, you know, getting into a stranger's car, and it's also had a really big impact on like just society in a way. So I think those are two really cool case studies as well.
Yeah, and Uber also, I think, impacted the way people view tracking, especially with the animation that you have of where the car, like Uber Eats, for example, like where your food is, where the car is in relation to your food, how far it is from getting to your place. A lot of people now, especially with delivery apps, now they're looking for creating these kinds of animations. And even if it's not like a food delivery service, if there's any sort of delivery element, they're trying to integrate these kinds of things because now this is what people prefer. But I feel like the biggest thing in this industry, and tell me if you guys agree, I feel like it's ruined enjoying the internet for me. Like, I feel like if I don't see a well-designed website, I'm like, I'm not even going to go on it.
It's also the design perspective. It's like you kind of understand design now. So I know I get feel the same way. If I see something on a website or an app and I'm like, this is a UX issue, I can pinpoint it out for sure.
The Zara website for me.
Oh my
God. I was on someone's, it was a podcast Patreon, and I just didn't like the way the Patreon app was. So I emailed them actually suggestions, and they were like, thank you, but we can't do that. And I was like, oh, okay.
No, but it is very true. Like, just like the effect also of like technology going on to, you know, the way that we're living our lives. And like, especially back to that Tinder reference, like I wrote a whole essay actually on the effect of kind of like that swipe culture on like the psychology of the user. And it's fascinating, you know, even just like the fact that you're away from the app and then, you know, you're missing out on those people like swiping on you and all of this stuff. I could keep talking for a long time on that, but I know we have one more question. Oh, though, if you guys are trying to become TikTok famous and you want to promote yourself, Alice wanted people to drop their TikTok handles, so this is your chance to shine if you so choose. But our last question of the night is from Margaret, and she was just wondering about the pushback from stakeholders when you're presenting your research findings and everything. And I know we kind of went into this a little bit, but if you wanted to speak for, you know, those people who maybe don't have as much of an appreciation for design or are just limited based on their own role, how you deal with that.
I think one thing that before you even go into the whole idea of pushback from anyone is being able to separate yourself from your design and research. So even if it's a critique, a team critique, they're not criticizing you, they're criticizing the work, and you are not your work, right? And design is always evolving and research is always evolving. So having other people's perspectives is always a bonus. So I would say that's the first element of it, in my opinion. And then when it actually comes to having pushback from people, I think that facts are your best friend. Anything that you present having some sort of factual basis to it. A lot of research, you want to make sure that you're staying impartial, you're not biased. You want to present your findings and not what your opinions are. And so that's super important. And the way you do that is to have some sort of factual basis to it, or even if it's not quantitative work that you're showing, if it's qualitative work, then having some sort of number that, 9 out of 10 people have agreed that they find this process difficult for XYZ reasons.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, like you can only show your work and show the research findings, and what they do about it is their problem. Like there's only so much you can do, and once you show those facts and try to convince them why this is the best for them and their product and their clients, whether they choose to implement it or not has no onus on you or your work. Just as Zainab said, it's something you kind of have to deal with as a designer. People may not always take to your input, and all you have to do is try your best and give them the reasons why you think that's the best way to go about it. And how they choose to do that it's up to them. It's like that saying is like, you can take them to the well, but you can't force them to drink it. And it's not your job to make them drink it. You can only take them there and show them the best course of action, and the rest is up to them. So never take anything personally, for sure. Just as Zainab said.
To echo some of the points, I worked a few client-facing roles before as well. I think at the end of the day, you just have to communicate as best as you can. And it's when it comes to clients, they have the last say, and really it's up to them. But I think one thing that another designer in a client-facing role taught me was just about choosing your battles as well, especially when you're working around constraints and timelines. Maybe certain decisions are more important than others, and if there's pushback on several sides, argue the most for what you think is the most vital decision that you have to make. Sometimes they're probably pushing back on minor things like the size of a logo or the color of something. But if it's more important, like something like your research shows very clearly that their users have an issue with X and you're trying to improve it, then maybe that's something that you want to argue a bit more for. So at the end of the day, again, yeah, they are making the final decision, but it's really about choosing the right battles and also just communicating as best as you can the benefits of going with a certain decision.
Perfect. And oh wait, did you have something to add there, Trisha?
No, I was saying that that's definitely, that was a good point.
Okay, perfect. So I think we'll end it off there because I know we've gone way over time now. But I know that Alice, you were wondering the flip side of that last question. But I think if any of you have any additional questions, I know that each of our panelists are actually involved in the event in another capacity as well. So if you reach out to them on the Discord, they will hopefully be able to get back to you. And if not, there are still coffee chats available for other mentors. And there's a whole host of people here this weekend to answer your design questions. And then the other side of that is maybe you just joined us sometime in the recent past and you didn't get to make the start of the talk. And in that case, you can head over to our YouTube channel probably by the end of the weekend, and you'll be able to see this video and many others from today and tomorrow and yesterday. So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much to our panelists, and thanks everyone who's watching out there, and have a great rest of your night, everyone.
Good luck on everyone's projects.
Good luck. Thank you.